How's it going, Fiery 49 fans? If you're watching this in the landscape format, you must be on YouTube. This is YouTube is where we put our longer format stuff, our deep dives into what we're doing with Fiery 49. We've got a few things on there so far, not much. We do have a lot of stuff coming up with the front and rear brakes and changing the tires. Got delayed on that. We lost some footage, had an SD card get corrupted. Some of our original footage, can't use it, can't complete the process. So as soon as we can get that filmed again and show exactly what we did, we'll get some videos up on the brakes, which seem to be few and far between. At least when we've tried to look it up and find videos about the drum brakes on the big trucks, the 1.5 ton and larger, not a lot out there. They're not complicated, but they are different than the smaller trucks. So you know, we're hoping some will find it helpful to have that out there and see what was done and how to deal with those. But in front of me right now, inline six Chevy 235, very, very similar but newer to the engine in Fiery 49. So when Fiery 49 was built early in 1949, it received the big engine, the 235 instead of the 216, but it's an early 235. When we started researching of what the truck had, what it needs, parts, that kind of stuff, one of the things we referred to is the stamping on the block to see exactly, confirm it was a 235 engine like we suspected based on the stenciling on the valve cover, but also it told us it's a Babbitt bearing 235. If you're not familiar with what a Babbitt bearing is, basically a Babbitt material, it's a bearing material that's a metal you melt down and you basically pour into place the bearing. And once you've poured the bearing in place, it gets machined and finished out to become the bearing surface of the part. So an example in this engine would be the connecting rod. The bearing would be poured into place while it was molten with the connecting rod and the journal, and then machine finished to fit the size of the crankshaft journal the rod had to go on. It's a process that worked, and it's working now. Fiery 49 is running just fine, but it's an old way of doing things. There are people that know how to deal with it, but they're few and far between and expensive. So with the truck having only 7,000 ish original miles on it, and the engine being of that Babbitt bearing style, it's just in our minds and our view, it's better to take that original engine out and preserve it and keep it in original running condition, and replace it with basically a sacrificial engine that fits the bill. We want to keep Fiery 49 as original looking as possible. That's the whole goal, is to make the truck look original, show the era of when it was built, but do it safely on modern roads. To do that, one of the things we need to do is we need to get the top speed of the truck up a little bit. We cruise comfortably at 38 to 40 miles an hour. If you really want to wind it out, 45 miles an hour. That's a symptom of a low horsepower engine being used and compensated with a rear end ratio that is geared very, very low for the mechanical advantage it provides to the low horsepower engine. So in addition to the Babbitt bearings in the original 49 engine we have, also all the journals, all the journals on the crankshaft where the main bearing journals and the rod journals are at, not all of those receive pressurized lube oil from the oil pump. And that style of engine, that early engine, um, some journals get pressurized engine oil, but others rely on splash lubrication. Basically, you're hoping enough things get churned around inside there that oil gets to the journals and lubricates them. Um, it worked. It is working. But if we really want to start putting long miles on, if you had to work the truck hard, that kind of stuff, the more modern engine with pressurized lube oil getting squeezed in everywhere it needs to be is a better system. There's a reason they went to that. Also, the more modern engine, instead of the Babbitt bearings, has insert style bearings. So if we tear into this and we find that the bearings inside are worn down, or we just want to put fresh bearings in, or some machining needs to take place, we can simply order up pre-made bearings that will fit the engine. They simply slide into place, get torqued, and they fit, versus having to get Babbitt material, melt it down, pour it in place, machine the Babbitt, all that stuff. It's a much simpler process to either rebuild or refresh the engine with that type bearing. So um, lots of reasons for the change. Preserve the original, don't tear up the original, that would be expensive to fix. Go to a more modern lubrication and bearing system to make the truck hopefully more reliable, and also allows us to get the horsepower up. Fiery 49, when built, Chevrolet rated that 235 at 85-ish horsepower. That's horsepower straight out of the crank at the flywheel. What they didn't say is that 85 horsepower, you immediately had to subtract what the water pump eats up, what the alternator or generator eats, the power it takes to turn the fan that's bolted on the front, and then all the parasitic loss that occurs also in the drive line, turning all the gears in the transmission through that heavyweight gear oil. In the case of Fiery 49 being a fire truck, you've got another transfer case full of gear oil for the pump. That takes horsepower. Then you get to the rear ratio and all the things back there turn through that gear oil, and that eats your horsepower. So even though the engine was rated 85, I would be surprised if we were getting even 50 horsepower at the ground. So the way they compensated for the low horsepower is you gave the engine mechanical advantage through your rear end ratio. So we've got a 4-speed transmission, but fourth gear is a direct drive. So the speed, when you're in fourth gear in the transmission, the speed of the engine is the speed that comes out of the back of the transmission. It goes to the rear end. In Fiery 49, if I remember the number correctly, I think the rear end ratio is 6.17 to 1. It's in the sixes for sure. I may have the points wrong, but that's a very, very low geared ratio. What that means is the drive shaft has to turn 6 times for every 1 time that the rear axles make a rotation. Really good for a weak engine. It gets lots of mechanical advantage. The problem is the engine has to rev very high going down the road to get any kind of speed. So right now we keep it at about 38 to 40 miles an hour. That has comfortable engine RPMs. It's not working it too hard, but we're running 40 miles an hour on roads that are mostly 55 miles an hour, and we're the big rolling roadblock when that happens. So to be able to, you can be too slow and be unsafe. We want to bring the truck speed up to the speed limit. We want to try to get 55 miles an hour out of the truck. We're going to do it through a combination of things. Newer engine with more horsepower. This engine's rated 110, I think, as it came from the factory. But we can do some basic modifications to it that should get us around 120, 125. That are minor things, some stuff in the intake runners. There could be a cam swap if we get really into it or need pistons. Bumping compression up, but not that hard to get us in that 120 range. Having that extra horsepower and torque will allow us to change the ratio in the rear end. We can get out of those 6s and down to the 4s. We haven't done the final math on what it'll take because you have to calculate the tire size, other stuff, but we'll see. Basically, we want to get the engine where it's cruising and running at about 2,500 RPM tops. When we're running at our top speed of 55 miles an hour, we'll do the final math at some point based on the tire, the height of the tires and that stuff, if this engine winds up being a good candidate for a rebuild. So that's where we're going with this. This won't be a quick one video series. We'll tear into this. We'll have a tear down video just to see what we find. We may find the motor's junk and that it's not worth the time, and we're going to throw it away. That's okay, and we're okay with doing that because we don't have anything in what's sitting right here. We bought the entire engine transmission running out of a 57 Chevy. The original owner had cruised for years on this engine. The car was driven in the shop and running, but they were doing a V8 swap and going to a newer transmission and taking what had been a fairly stock car, making not necessarily a hot rod, but pepping it up, going to a V8. So we bought everything from the front of the engine, hoses, water pump, alternators, everything, all the way to the back tail shaft of the transmission. Picked it up for $300 here locally off Facebook Marketplace. I thought it was a pretty good deal because we sold all the transmission components a week later for $150. Already had half our money back. The alternator's good. The starter's good. Engine accessories, we got an exhaust manifold and intake manifold that both are in good condition. So we have a spare carburetor. This engine had a dealer installed oil filter on it. Fiery 49's engine does not have an oil filter in that era. It was just change the oil a lot, but no filtration on it. So we'll definitely use that oil filtration system. We may modify it where it's a full pass through versus a bypass filtration, but the stuff is there. And all of those accessories are worth more than the $150 that we had left still invested. So the way I look at it, this engine was free. And if we need to throw it away, we'll throw it away or do whatever. But I'm hopeful the fact that it was running and cruising and the guy was still going to car shows, that it's in good enough shape that we can get away with freshening up would be great, but no more than a basic rebuild. So we'll see what we find. We'll tear into this thing, and hopefully we'll wind up with an engine that's 120 horsepower that looks very, very similar to the original engine in Fiery 49 to where most people won't know the difference. And we can change that rear end ratio, get 55 miles an hour, get out of the way, get places in a timely manner, and just make the truck more enjoyable and able to be shared with more people in more places. Because that's the whole reason. The social media stuff, it's an outreach thing. We want to meet people, though. You can find us Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and here on YouTube, and that's great. Uh, but we still like personal interaction. We want people to get out and be able to touch the truck. We're not doing a full restoration on the body. We're going to keep it where the kids can ride in the truck. The kids can ride in the back of the truck. If they touch it, they're not going to get yelled at for "don't touch it, you'll scratch it," that kind of stuff. We want the truck to be enjoyed by the public. We want it out and about for everyone to see. So that's what's up. If you like the plan, like, subscribe, follow along. If you don't like the plan, okay, buy your own, do your thing. But we hope to see you here again soon, or at some events throughout the years as we keep going. And we hope you'll come back and check us out. Take care.